Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating and kind of mysterious chapters of ancient history, the Indus Valley civilization. For thousands of years, its incredible cities were just lost, buried under the earth. Now, if you're prepping for exams like the UPSC, you know this isn't just cool history, it's an absolutely essential topic. So let's get right into it with a structured, high-yield explainer that'll give you all the key points you need to really nail this. All right, let's just start with the sheer scale of this thing because it is mind-boggling. The Indus Valley civilization, or the IVC, wasn't just a couple of cities. Nope, it was a massive, sprawling network of towns and urban centers that covered 1.5 million square kilometers. We're talking over 1,500 known sites discovered so far. To put that in perspective, we're talking about a civilization covering an area almost half the size of modern India. It was absolutely colossal. And the IVC wasn't living in a bubble, right? It rose up during the Bronze Age alongside the world's other great river valley civilizations. You had Mesopotamia on the Tigris and Euphrates, Egypt on the Nile, and China on the Yellow River. But get this, the Indus Valley civilization was, by a huge margin, the most geographically widespread of them all, not even close. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at how this lost world was even rediscovered. Then we'll get into their legendary urban planning. Seriously, it's amazing. From there, we'll dive into their economy, their cool seals, and their trade networks. We'll also spotlight the key cities you've got to know before finally tackling the great mystery. How did it all end? Let's jump in. Okay, so how does a civilization this massive just vanish from history, only to be found again millennia later? Let's unpack the story of its discovery and the timeline that historians use to understand its incredible rise and its eventual fall. Now, this is super important to remember. The IVC didn't just pop up overnight, fully formed. It grew over centuries, and we usually break its history down into 3 main phases. You've got the early Harappan phase, which was kind of the startup period where the foundations were being laid. Then comes the mature Harappan phase. This was the golden age, the peak of their power with those incredible booming cities. And finally, the late Harappan phase, which is when things started to fragment and decline. This timeline, this is the essential framework for everything that follows. Okay, let's move on to what is honestly the most impressive and defining feature of the Indus Valley civilization. Its ridiculously advanced, standardized urban planning. This is what truly set them apart from everyone else at the time, and it's something we've got to look at closely. So picture this. Most Harappan cities followed this stunningly consistent blueprint. They were split into 2 distinct parts. Over to the west, you'd usually find a raised, fortified area that we call the citadel. This is where you see the big public buildings, the granaries, and structures like the Great Bath. It seems like it was the administrative or religious center of the city. Then, to the east, you had the much larger lower town. This was the residential area where most people lived, and it was meticulously planned. The engineering on display in that lower town is just staggering. We're talking about streets laid out in a perfect grid, intersecting at perfect 90-degree angles. They developed one of the world's very first advanced sanitation systems, with covered drains running from individual houses. They also mass-produced standardized burnt bricks, giving their cities a uniformity you just didn't see in Egypt or Mesopotamia. But you know what's just as fascinating? It's what we don't find. There are no grand monumental temples, no huge royal palaces. This might hint at a totally different kind of society, maybe one run by a council of elites or merchants instead of a single god king. So what was the engine driving this huge, super organized civilization? Well, let's explore their economy and culture by looking at their most iconic artifacts, their seals, and the huge role they played in a trade network that stretched for thousands of miles. These tiny stone seals were basically ancient security tags, a brilliant and simple solution for building trust in long-distance trade. Here's how it worked. A merchant packs their goods, ties it up, and then slaps a lump of wet clay over the knot. Then, they'd press their own unique seal into that clay. When the clay dried, that impression acted like a personal stamp and a lock. If the seal was broken when it arrived, the buyer knew someone had been messing with their stuff. Simple, but incredibly effective. Now, while we've found thousands of these seals, one mysterious image completely dominates the record, the so-called unicorn. This one-horned, mythical-looking animal is by far the most common picture on these seals. I mean, get this, an incredible 60% of all the seals found at Mohenjo-daro feature this unicorn. That is not a coincidence. Its prevalence suggests this figure had some huge significance. Was it the logo of a powerful merchant group, a symbol of a specific community, a deity? It's one of the great, tantalizing clues they left behind. Okay, so we've looked at the big picture features of the civilization. Now let's zoom in. To really get a feel for the IVC, we need to explore some of its most important cities. Each one tells a slightly different part of the story, so let's take a closer look. This table right here is pure gold for revision, so feel free to pause and just soak it in. At Harappa, the very first site they excavated, we find these huge granaries and unique cemeteries that tell us about their afterlife beliefs. At Mohenjo-daro, the biggest city, we find the iconic Great Bath and that famous little bronze dancing girl statue. Lothal, down in modern-day Gujarat, was clearly a major port, with its incredible artificial dockyard and some of the earliest evidence for rice. And finally, Dhalavira, also in Gujarat, has some really unique things going on. Dhalavira is so interesting because it's kind of a rule breaker. Instead of that typical two-part layout, it had 3 distinct fortified sections, including a middle town. But the really amazing thing there is its water management. Dhalavira is in a super arid region, the Rann of Kutch, so the people there engineered this incredibly sophisticated system of 16 reservoirs and channels to capture every last drop of rainwater. It's just a stunning example of their ability to adapt and engineer solutions for tough environments. So, we've looked at the incredible achievements of the Indus Valley civilization, its huge cities, its advanced engineering, its complex trade. But all great civilizations eventually decline, and that brings us to the final and most mysterious chapter of their story, the reasons for their enigmatic end. So, the big question is, what on earth happened? After nearly 1,000 years of this amazing urban life, why were these magnificent, perfectly planned cities just abandoned? Why was their script forgotten, their entire legacy lost to history for thousands of years? It remains one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Well, there's no single, easy answer. Instead, scholars have a few major theories on the table. Some point to natural disasters, like massive floods or earthquakes. Others suggest long-term climate change. Maybe the monsoons shifted and their agriculture just collapsed. Then there's the older theory of an Aryan invasion, which is pretty heavily debated now and doesn't have a lot of hard evidence, but it's still part of the conversation. And some think that when their trade with places like Mesopotamia collapsed, their economy just couldn't recover. The most likely answer? It probably wasn't just one thing. It was likely a complex mix of these factors, hitting different cities at different times, leading to a gradual decline. And this brings us to the central, haunting paradox of the Indus Valley civilization. These people were unparalleled master planners. They could design cities, sanitation systems, and complex water networks with incredible foresight. And yet, when faced with what was likely a perfect storm of crises, they couldn't engineer their own survival. It leaves us with a compelling mystery and a pretty powerful reminder of just how fragile even the most advanced societies can be.